Hi, welcome to another TeamSense Tuesday webinar. My name is Caroline Rizzo, and I'm so excited to have Alison Teegarden joining me today. We have a really great topic. We are talking a little bit in depth about our product, specifically utilizing Communicate and Portal and TeamSense. We'll talk about how to use them and how you can get the most out of using them together. Before we jump in, let's cover a few housekeeping items. So, as always, we love questions. Feel free to place them in the Q&A panel that's at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to get to all the questions at the end of the webinar, so just be patient. We will definitely be keeping an eye on them, and again, we'll talk about them at the end. Also, you may have noticed that this webinar is being recorded, so if for any reason you have to drop early or you want to revisit the content at a later date, we will be emailing out the recording to the registrants via a YouTube link, but you can always go to teamsense.com/webinars and take a look at all of our previous webinars and also what's upcoming. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into it and introduce ourselves. And Alison, if you want to go ahead and skip to the next slide. My name is Caroline Rizzo, as I mentioned. I am the marketing manager here at TeamSense. My main goal of hosting these webinars is to learn from the experts out in the field of manufacturing and logistics. So I'm here asking all the crazy questions. And I'm so excited to have Alison joining us today, who really is an expert in the TeamSense product. She's a co-founder, but I don't want to steal your thunder, Alison. So go ahead and introduce
I
yourself.
feel a lot of pressure, Caroline, after my introduction. I'm Alison Teegarden. I am one of the co-founders of TeamSense and the head of strategy and product operations, and really was part of the team that was building the Communicate Portal features from the get-go. So I'm really excited to jump into these. I think these are features where a lot of folks don't know exactly how to use them to their maximum potential, and so it's going to be really fun to share more of that today.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And I will, of course, be asking you questions throughout all of the demonstration, but really you'll be driving the reins, but excited to learn more. So I figured, why not just jump right into it? Let's go.
Awesome. Yeah.
Move
let's
along.
do it. Yeah. So we're talking today about a couple different features in TeamSense, the Communicate feature and the Portal feature. And a lot of times when folks first come to meet TeamSense for the first time, the thing that they're really interested in is sort of absence management. How do I reduce absenteeism? And when they realize that we have these other features to drive engagement, there's a little bit of a light bulb moment. And so I'm hoping that this today is going to be that light bulb moment for a few folks in terms of how they can leverage this digital connection through TeamSense to their employees. So just to kind of kick it off, let's talk about what Communicate actually is. So Communicate is a feature in TeamSense where you can broadcast messages out to your employees. So typically the folks that we're working with, are on a floor of a warehouse or a plant. They don't have a corporate email. Sending out information to them is really challenging. Sometimes you can get it to them at a stand-up, but that can be hit and miss. And if you're operating an organization where you've got shifts running 24/7, it's really tough to get that information out reliably across every single shift, every single team. And so the Communicate feature really takes that and enables you to get information at the hands of all your employees, regardless of whether they have a corporate email address, regardless of whether they start their shift at 10 p.m. or at 6 a.m. And so it enables you to essentially, what you can see here, create a message that you send out to a set of users that you define. So it could be the entire company. More likely, it's the entire site or a specific team or department, maybe everybody who reports to Caroline, but really looking for and targeting that message to those that need it most. And then you can either choose to send it now or you can schedule it out for later. So we'll talk a little bit about what this looks like in scheduling it for later, but we see some customers really leverage that capability to almost build out like a campaign for their employees. So we can talk a little bit about that. But this capability, it's so flexible, right? I can send any messages to all of my employee base that I've never been able to communicate with before. That I think the flexibility almost makes it harder to figure out how to use Yeah, it's like, oh, there's too many options. It's like option overload. And so what we want to talk about today is what are some of the ways that we see customers really use this in a really powerful and meaningful way. And so we're going to start off with just a few different examples here. And Caroline, I know you and I both know of customers who are using this in different ways. So jump in with thoughts and questions. But let's start with the basics, right? Announcements. These are things that probably jump to mind when you're thinking of communicating to employees. But sharing a policy update. A lot of times it can be really difficult to change a policy and do it in a way that makes thousands of employees working across multiple shifts aware of the change. And so sharing that out through TeamSense is something that we've seen multiple customers choose to do. Reminders about benefits enrollment. I talked earlier about how we see some folks almost schedule out messages like a campaign. Benefits enrollment is a perfect example of that because we all know there's a specific timeline for benefits enrollment. The window does close. And so if folks are not enrolled by the time the window closes, they are not eligible for benefits for the rest of the year. And so there's an urgency around it and there's a timeline around it. And so we'll see folks create the messages in advance and schedule them out, 1 month in advance of the window closing, 2 weeks, 1 week, 3 days left to go, final day, and be able to do that all in advance. And then it's taken care of and they don't need to think about that communication again. So using that scheduling frequency is really helpful.
That's huge. I think that's such a great point, how you mentioned thinking about it in terms of a campaign, right? And
as a marketing manager, this makes sense.
Yeah, I was like, oh, you're speaking my marketing language. I love this. But yeah, I think in terms of really laying out your calendar for the year and understanding where are the critical points of communication. I know every HR manager is thinking about open enrollment. They're probably thinking about it even as early as over the summer because I think it mostly happens in the fall, right? And so I think that's key is really giving the HR managers the power to really be proactive with their communication. It's not just used as a reactive tool. Obviously, it's great that it can be used as a reactive tool because of how quickly you are able to get communications out, right? I think we've had examples of, we'll probably get into this with more of the operational side, but if you have bad weather, you have a storm and the plant shuts down for the day because frankly, people can't access it. For example, this last Friday, there were crazy tornadoes all throughout Nebraska, Oklahoma, and that has huge impacts on people and being able to really effectively communicate with their employees to make sure they're safe. But then obviously, hey, don't come in today for your shift. There's been this thing that's happened. So I like how both the proactive thinking and then, of course, being able to think reactively as well is key.
100%, Caroline, and you're right on it with being able to think sort of ambidextrously on the proactive and reactive side of things. And one thing we've actually done with some of our organizations that we work with is our customer success team has actually kind of helped them set up kind of like a marketing communicate plan for especially when they're first starting out. And learning kind of what are the best practices around communicate. How do we accustom employees to receiving information through this channel? During the first sort of 60 days of TeamSense rollout, we might actually set up like, okay, what are some key messages that we want to send out around driving engagement in certain, activities or programs that you already have that today are really challenging to communicate about. And let's set up those messages and schedule them to go out on a certain cadence over the course of your first 60 days. And with the goal that by the end of the first 60 days, employees have this habit of understanding that this is a method that is being used to communicate important information and information that matters to me. And now I'm trusting and relying on this method to go as this is my connection to my employer going forward.
Yeah, and especially, I mean, I don't want to give it away, but we'll talk more about with Portal, but it's like, how do you establish that source of truth, right? The place that they can go to, I think, is imperative to good communication between employees and their management. So yeah,
Yeah.
to add to your point.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So Yes, announcements of any type are just really a valuable way to leverage communicate and the power of being able to get important information into your employees' hands. Um, some of the other examples that we've seen, job openings, sharing job openings, encouraging the use of a referral bonus program. If you have a program where, for every employee who successfully refers a friend to come work for the company, they receive some sort of bonus. We see folks using this as a channel to reminder, hey, we have these job openings, and by the way, don't forget we have this referral bonus program. And so, just a lot of ways that you can think about sharing important information that you really want employees to be, keeping in mind throughout their days. On top of announcements, this one I love. Employee recognition. It is so challenging sometimes to really ensure that employees on the floor that are working across a bunch of different shifts feel seen, especially when they go above and beyond. And so we, see lots of organizations use this as a channel to announce an employee of the month, and say, hey, everybody congratulate so-and-so for what an incredible job that they've done this past month. Announcing retirement or anniversary celebrations, highlighting exciting updates around the company's performance, like, hey, Q1 was awesome. Nice work, everybody. Or sending shout outs to teams, which is really fun. But, like here's an example. Keep it up, team. You crushed it today. Huge thanks to Marty's team for jumping in. But just something that historically would have been challenging to call out. And here's an opportunity to do it in a way that's public, but also can make sure that the employee receives it.
I think that this is something that we as desk workers frankly take for granted. I think, oh yeah, of course, like, doesn't everybody do this? We use Slack channels or we use Teams or something, right? But it is such a bigger challenge to be able to connect with the hourly employees, specifically when they're working across different shifts, right? And so I think that part is huge, is being able to establish that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And similarly, I'd say, holidays and events also can be something that we might take for granted as being really easy to share in sort of an email setting. But without that, it can be really, really challenging. So we see lots of organizations leverage this channel as a way to recognize holidays and announce events, remind folks about events. I think, for example, this example here of Spirit Week, that was an example from one of our customers. They had a Spirit Week and they asked folks to wear a jersey for their favorite sports team. We've also seen organizations for holidays like Veterans Day send out a message saying, at 11 a.m. today, we're all going to observe a moment of silence in honor of those who have served our country. So again, a channel that provides that way to sort of recognize or highlight something that didn't exist before.
I think that's a really great creative outlet for HR managers as well. Again, in terms of employee engagement and being more proactive with communications. I think another example we've talked about too in the past is, we have a company picnic. Here's a sign up. Can you imagine how difficult it would be to get people to sign up for a company picnic on like a clipboard, like we have always done in the past?
Cool.
That's a lot. So being able to create like some sort of survey and send that out and have people sign up is key. But I think it just simplifies it and streamlines it for both employees and HR managers, frankly. So I think that's something, again, tapping into that creative mindset that I know that so many HR managers think about day in and day out. Not only are they having to keep up with who's absent, who's in, who's out, and all the stress that comes with that. But how do we engage employees is just as critical.
Absolutely. And honestly, the creativity is one of the most fun things, working with all these different organizations, and everybody sort of brings their own lens to what we can do with communicate. And so, things like we've seen folks send out a communicate around National Laugh Day, which I didn't even know existed. And they had an employee contest to submit a joke. And then you would vote on the best joke.
Yeah.
But just like really fun and quirky things like that. I would never have thought of using Communicate for that, but I love that one of our customers did. So the creativity is there, and it's awesome.
Yeah, it kind of helps establish your company culture too. And we do that at
Really.
TeamSense. It's like we've started doing this thing every Friday. You actually asked a question this week. It's like, what's one song that you can't get out of your head? And it's just a fun way to participate and feel like, wow, I'm kind of part of this bigger group. And yeah, I think that's really special. And I think it also just helps simplify employee engagement. It can be so simple. It doesn't have to be this like, oh, we have to do this big, massive campaign with employees. It could be as simple as sending out a small survey. I know as an example, we talked about how one customer will send out a weekly survey on what Pandora station they want to listen to.
Yeah. hmm Exactly. Love that example. But yeah, putting a little bit of control of the working environment back in the hands of employees is fantastic. Last item, and you touched on this briefly earlier, but operational messages. Obviously we talked about Communicate as a really powerful engagement tool, but there are times where we need to urgently communicate something to employees that is more operational in nature. So we see folks using this to say, hey, we need overtime this weekend, and we're looking for sort of these particular shifts, schedule changes, site closures due to weather, like you mentioned earlier, or something else. Send out safety tips, on a regular cadence. Again, you could use that scheduling feature to schedule out a weekly safety tip in advance. Reminders to complete trainings is pretty common as well. And then maintenance notes, this machine is down and maintenance is working on it. It's expected to be back up within the next 4 hours. Those kinds of things can be very difficult to communicate out, especially in a really large facility. And so being able to share it via text is super helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, question for you, Allison. So, obviously, we've talked a lot about these mass messages. Like, these are going out to groups of people. So, obviously, you can schedule things to go out. You can even create groups that you send them to specifically. But can you talk a little bit more about maybe more of the one-on-one abilities, like being able to connect with an individual employee? What does that look like in terms of using Communicate and TeamSense?
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. That's a great call out. So yeah, the use cases we've been highlighting here have more been focused on the bulk mass messaging. But the way to set up a Communicate message enables you to scale it from the entire company to sending a message to a single employee. And so we do see folks use this to get a message directly to one employee. It could be more on the operational side of things, like, hey, we're still missing your I-9. Would you please come to HR before the end of the day? Or we need some additional information on your dependents. So it could just be very operational. It could also be, more engagement related. So we see, for example, birthday messages that are sent out to specific employees. Happy birthday, Caroline. We're so glad that you've been with us this last year. You've made this big difference in our team and just wanted to recognize you.
Well, thank you. Yes.
But it's really fun. And I think, even to the point of seeing folks receive information about like job promotions,
Right.
that or pay increases. That would be individual message targeted to a single person through the Communicate mode of sending messages. So yeah, definitely highlighting the single person as a recipient kind of opens up the aperture for a whole another set of use cases that are really important.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I just can't imagine being an HR manager having to go find one individual person on the floor and talk with them in person, especially if they are working a shift where I'm asleep in the middle of the night or in the middle of the day right. So being able to communicate in that way is huge. And hey, I think you've talked about too, like you said pay raises, people have done raffles, birthdays, anniversaries, offer letters, or let's say that you want to stagger your onboarding communications with that individual too. That's huge. And it just saves so much time and it streamlines everything. And I think again, having that record of communication is key to be able to always point back to it. Part of having a line of transparency between employees and their supervisors is creating a trail of, hey, here is the place where we talked about this and that. So even if there's a situation where you have to point back to, hey, we did have this communication, having that documentation, critical.
Totally. So the record of these messages is always there. So that's absolutely a huge piece of it too.
Yeah.
And I love also that you mentioned earlier around onboarding. This is something where we actually see, another use case around scheduling messages for onboarding, but you could target like everybody who's starting today with a message like, hey, welcome. We're so excited that you're here. And, we'll get into this a little bit with Portal potentially, but, here are some resources or things that you might FAQs on your first day. Here's what to expect or whatnot. And it's a great way to help people feel seen on the first day. And we know, right, all the data shows us that really the first initial moment and ultimately leading to, say, 90 days in is what kind of makes or breaks an employee's tenure with a company. And so leveraging this as a tool to help an employee feel welcome can make an enormous difference.
First impressions are everything.
It is. It really first impression. Yeah.
Well, and it's also cool to be able to be like, yeah, look, like we're talking with you, we're meeting you where you were at. We're really simplifying communication. It creates an open dialogue. It just allows the employee to have more flexibility in how they want to communicate, and also allows more flexibility for supervisors or HR managers too. So
totally. Let's talk a little bit about Portal, which is kind of a different type of resource, but just as important. So, with Communicate, it's really about broadcasting messages out to your employees. Portal is kind of the flip side of the coin. So it's about employees, taking the initiative to access a resource on their own. And the way that we think about Portal is it's kind of like an intranet. So many organizations have an intranet for internal employees that has certain resources, information, or news that's for employees only. The challenge with these intranets is they're usually only accessible to somebody with a company email. So you think about, for example, a SharePoint site. You need to have a company email in order to access that site. And so for a lot of the hourly folks who are on a plant floor who don't have a company email, they are excluded essentially from these resources. And so, TeamSense when we built Portal, it was really looking for a way to provide those same resources to employees without having to have that kind of corporate level access. And so with the TeamSense Portal, it's essentially a set of resources that administrators define within the administrator console, and then employees can access on demand. So employees essentially access it by texting in to the TeamSense phone number. Usually the word is Portal, but texting in and then they'll receive a link back. And if they open that link, it's going to give them a page that looks somewhat like this, where basically they'll see all of the resources that have been defined for them. And anything that can be linked can go in the portal. So it's really easy to set up a portal link. You can do it in about 10 seconds. Basically, you drop in a link and title it, benefits or whatnot, and save it, and you're good to go. And so it's a really flexible way to help employees self-serve more. So when we're starting to onboard a new customer, when we talk about what's the way to get the most out of Portal, the question that we usually ask them is, what are the employees coming to you to ask most frequently? And what can you do to enable more self-service within the portal? So That usually kind of triggers, a few thoughts around, oh, I get so many questions every day on X. How could we put more information in the portal to help employees answer those questions on their own? And so some of the things that we see, benefits website, payroll website, access to the time and attendance system. Obviously, job openings or company news are pretty common items in an intranet system, but also things like the employee handbook or the attendance policy we'll see show up in company portals. Posters or info about events. We talked earlier about safety tips, being able to include those there. Employee FAQs, videos. We'll see videos posted to the portal. And then, even links to certain forms. And so whether those are forms that we've created for you at TeamSense through the custom forms capability, or forms that you've created elsewhere. And so really it's thinking flexibly about, okay, what are the questions I hear all the time? And then enabling employees to kind of take that and own that information for themselves.
Yeah, I think I can imagine if you are an HR manager that has to oversee 100,000, however many employees, and any chance that you can limit the number of questions that you get. Where's the attendance policy? Where's the employee handbook? Or I have this absence that I'm trying to fight or something. And they're like, well, I don't know where the employee handbook is or the attendance policy. I've never seen it. It's like, no, hold on. Let's make sure, again, we establish that source of truth so that you can always point back to it very clearly. And I think it's so important for HR managers to really establish that connection early on when you're onboarding to say, hey, this is how you can find everything self-serve. This is where you go. This is how you do it, right? That way you're not getting hundreds of questions. Where do I find this? Where do I find that? And I think it's just,
literally hundreds, Caroline.
Yeah. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, if I get another question, I'm going to scream. And so I think it's critical in any organization, right? Anytime that you get onboarded, you want to know, where do I find information on benefits? Where do I find information on PTO policies, attendance policies, obviously with this, but making it clear, easy to find is huge. My one question, if I'm an HR manager and I'm new to TeamSense, I'm really taking a look at Portal and how to build it. Is this something that generally people start from scratch on? Like, let's say they can't build Portal to what they want it to be. Do y'all have a template? What's kind of the way that we help onboard people into Portal typically?
Yeah, so it is sort of a carte blanche for your creativity. But yeah, customer success team will sit down and kind of talk with you about, like, okay, what are the things where you have employees coming to you, or what are the resources that employees want to access the most? And today, for some reason, it's difficult for them to access that. How do we break down those barriers? And one of the things that we will also talk a little bit about as we're working with new customers is the fact that Portal is accessible from anywhere. So one of the benefits of this is that even if an employee is not physically at the plant or the warehouse, they can still access these resources off-site. And so, for example, we had an instance where there was an employee who, I think it was either very late in the evening or if it was over a weekend, their child got injured and they needed to take them to urgent care. And they didn't know what urgent care facilities were within their network for their health insurance.
Yeah.
And then they remembered TeamSense Portal had that.
Yeah.
So their company had put that information in the portal. And so the employee was able to text Portal, get that information, and take their kids to the right urgent care that was in network. So things that, taking a lens of, like, what are the resources, not only that we get asked about a lot, but resources that today might be really difficult to access and somebody might even need when they're not physically at the site and they don't have recourse to ask. How do we enable employees with those kinds of resources through the portal?
Yeah, and it's so much easier just to be able to text portal and not think, oh my gosh, I gotta remember what my credentials are to get into this app. And then
Log in.
like, oh, geez. I've been through that myself where I was legitimately at a doctor's office and they're
Yep.
asking me about my insurance. And I'm like, ah, crap. I need to figure out my my login to get into this app through my company. And I forget it. And it was just such a scramble. And so being able to minimize that fluster moment as much as possible was really important to me. Because that was just I was already in a stressful moment. We don't want to
Yep.
complicate it anymore for people. So when people are in a stressful time, whether they're sick or they're trying to figure something out with their health insurance benefits, the texting solution makes it so much easier.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And the thing that's, I think, particularly powerful is when we can take these resources that are put into the portal and then we can help sort of socialize them with the use of communicate, which actually kind of gets us into the final way to sort of supercharge your use of these two future features, which is combining the two. And so I know but really we see that once customers really start to combine the two of them, the number of use cases that they have for using Communicate and Portal really starts to explode. And so things that we see is really, making an announcement where you share a call to action using Communicate and you direct employees to the portal and you create and post more resources there. This is your benefits enrollment. The first question somebody asks is, how do I enroll? Or what are the benefits options? Send them to the portal, right? Like answer that next step for them, give them that next step and use the portal to do that. And so here, carpool program, reply portal to access more info and sign up. Production schedules are different. Reply portal to see next week's schedule. These are all things where you may want to provide more information or you may want to specifically direct employees to a call to action.
Mm-hmm.
And doing it through the portal is a really easy way to provide that with more flexibility and be able to direct them to, a sign up form or a link that provides them with more information than they would have had otherwise.
And this is where, Allison, you tie back to custom forms, right? Like this is where
Absolutely.
custom forms really come in handy here.
Yeah. So custom forms can be a kind of the next level of this.
Oh, we're getting really nerdy. We're getting nerdier now.
I don't know, we're getting nerdy.
Product nerdiness. I love
it. But custom forms, one of the really fun things about custom forms is when a customer comes to us to talk about a custom form, and we will work with them to understand what's your objective with this form and how do we provide it to employees in a way that's going to get the right engagement. One of the things that we can do with custom forms is we can actually set them up with a specific, what we call a text keyword. So, for example, those of you who have called off via TeamSense or access the portal, you may have texted a specific keyword and then received back a link to the thing that you were looking for. So, for custom forms, we can set up that keyword as well. So, for example, we have one customer I can think of who has a custom form for overtime signups. And I think their keyword is just overtime. And so what they'll do is when they need overtime, they'll send out a communicate message and they will say, overtime shift available tonight from this time to this time. If you're interested, reply overtime and submit the form. And the employees will reply overtime. They'll get a link to a form, they'll fill it out and submit it. And then the customer will immediately have a list of all of the people who have signed up for overtime. And so it's, again, just using Communicate in a way to drive that call to action, combining it with portal or forms or whatnot to be able to really create an end-to-end workflow.
That's absolute magic. Because, if you're an HR manager today without using something like Communicate, How do you accomplish that with overtime? What are people doing today to do that?
Usually, oftentimes, it's the supervisors on the floor that are
Yeah.
trying to track down folks and say, "Hey, we need people. Can you stay later? Can you go ahead and do an extra shift tomorrow, or change, the time that you're going to do work tomorrow?"
Mm.
And it's something that can cause so much scrambling.
Yeah.
And whenever mandatory or voluntary overtime is necessary, it's always a time when there's pressures on the team and the organization, and they're trying to meet certain commitments that they have to their customers. And so, uh, scrambling to try to figure out who can cover,
Yeah.
uh, is challenging. And so, being able to automate a piece of that, I know working with some of the organizations that we work with, that they've been able to eliminate hours of overhead time trying to think through how do we fill certain shifts, using functionality like this.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, and I think too, we've talked about some customers how some have used it more for emergency measures, right? Like, okay, if there's an emergency happening, that's when we want to use it. But I think what we've discussed too is how it doesn't have to just be used for emergencies. It can be used very proactively, like for engagement. But in the case of an emergency, it's critical that you do not have this scramble time. I can remember we had a customer on here, Emily Cockler, who talked a lot about the fact that when they did have a storm, they were trying to call people. And a lot of
Oh
their
yeah.
phone numbers had changed or
Oh yeah.
didn't have updated information. Everything was out of date and it was just chaos. And here you are trying to make sure that everybody stays safe, being able to streamline that would be just so much easier, so much less heartburn, and getting that critical message out at a really fast rate is important in any emergency.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's not the only organization who I know that is trying to
I'm
do
sure there's
individual. It was before TeamSense. So there is a better way. It's called communicate. Uh, awesome. Well,
yeah.
I think with that, I'm watching our time. I think we can probably uh, move to Q&A, though I know that you might want to talk about next week's webinar first.
Yes, absolutely. So, of course, before we jump into Q&A, I always want to highlight next week's webinar. So we host these webinars weekly on Tuesdays, as you may have noticed. So our next webinar is a really hot topic, how to effectively manage employee no-call, no-show. So no-call, no-show is a huge point of heartburn for our dear HR managers, operations managers. It really does impact the bottom line. So we want to talk about some strategies of really how to manage this, how to communicate with your employees, how to set expectations, but then also some tactics to actually help reduce no-call, no-shows, and how TeamSense really can help with that. Sarah's joining me next week. Sarah is our senior customer success manager. She works with all of our customers. She's amazing. She's basically a celebrity at TeamSense, as you can probably also agree with Alison. So excited to bring her expertise to the table and learn more about some of those strategies. So feel free to join us next week. Let's go ahead and hop into Q&A. So we did have a few questions come in that I'm reading on the screen here. Some really good ones. And Alison would love your expertise on this. Again, as I go through the questions, thanks for throwing this up to you. We really appreciate everybody joining us. We'd love for you to get in touch with us if you want to learn more about TeamSense, if you want to see a demo, see it in action. Of course, you can also take a look just in general on our website if you want to see some case studies from some of our existing customers. Of course, I'd love for you to join us every week at our webinars as well. So again, teamsense.com/webinars, come hang out with us every week. All right, question number 1 that came through. This is a really good one. Are there any limits to how many messages a person could send, HR manager, employee? What does that look like?
There are currently no limits. Go crazy.
Not example.
The limit does not exist. No, you can't. I'll say that there are no TeamSense imposed limits right now on how many communicate messages that you can send. Nor are there any TeamSense imposed limits right now on how many resources you can add to your portal. So as of this time, there are no limits. However, one thing that we do caution organizations to think about is, usually most of your employees will have their notification preferences set to text message, which means that when you send a message, they're going to be getting a text message. And so simply to be thoughtful about how many text messages you're sending to any one employee. We have had some customers get really excited about the use of Communicate and sends like 30 messages out to employees within and usually we'll say, okay, like love that there's enthusiasm, lots of ideas for how to use it, but just be thoughtful about, blowing up employees' phones. If you do get a little over enthusiastic, there's of course a risk that employees start to tune it out because it almost feels like spam.
Yeah. Unsubscribe. My marketing brain is turning back on again. It's like we talked about campaigns and now we're talking about engagement. Yeah.
It's very similar. Yeah. So that's the one caution that I would add is just, be thoughtful. But no, right now there are no TeamSense imposed limits.
Okay, great. And you also mentioned same thing with Portal as well. There's no limit in terms of what you can add in there. Obviously, it's always helpful to make things as searchable as possible and,
Right. So if you have like 70 different things in there, it could be difficult to navigate. So again, be thoughtful.
Yeah, being thoughtful about it. And again, customer success team can help you set up some best practices based on what we've seen with other customers. So that is a great resource. Final question that came through, which is a good one that we get often. We have talked about this in previous webinars, but can I communicate with my employees in Spanish? Obviously, all the examples we showed are in English because we're speaking in English today, but would love for you to explain a little bit more.
Absolutely. So we do have some organizations who will send out the same communicate message multiple times in different languages, just to ensure that the message is received by all of their employees on the floor. On top of that, one thing I should note is, earlier we were looking at Portal and those Portal resources and the names of those Portal resources, like benefits or employee handbook or whatnot. TeamSense has the functionality so that you can actually add the names of those Portal resources in every language that you have enabled for your organization. So you put it in Spanish, you can also add it in Vietnamese, whatnot, what have you. And so making sure that all employees have the access to the same resources is really important.
Yeah, definitely supporting that diversity. I think that's a challenge that we've seen customers come across is, let's say, an employee who English is not their first language and they are calling off for even a very valid reason and you cannot understand what they're saying, they can understand you. Sometimes that can get lost in translation in terms of logging that is what we've seen before. And maybe they get points for that, more points than they should have gotten when it was just a miscommunication. So being able to really streamline that communication and engage with your employees in their preferred language shows a lot of care and compassion, really for their needs. So, and how many languages again, Alison?
25.
Okay, 25. That's pretty impressive. Yep.
25 different languages.
Yeah, which is really cool. So, okay, well, we're at the end of our time. And again, thank you so much to everybody that joined us today. You can find us here weekly. Join us next week when we talk more about No Call, No Show. But Alison, thanks so much for joining us too. Really appreciate you letting me pick your brain is always super fun. So learned a ton and thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it.
Sounds great. Thank you, Caroline.
Yeah.
Take care, everyone.
Everybody next week. Take care. Have a good rest of your week.